Go. There we go. Okay. Oh, I think we have one. All right, I think we're a go. We have all of our panelists here. Thank you all for attending tonight. For those who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Kleino. I teach here in the Criminal Justice Department, and I just wanted to welcome the panelists and kind of kick things off for the night. So I'm going to just read a quick introduction. If any of you read in the Daily Telegram with the public forum, I'm going to take some from that, but then go off with some generated questions from the Criminal Justice Department to kind of get us going. So the Criminal Justice Program at Siena Heights University would like to welcome all the panelists and all of you audience members for joining us on this fine, rainy November evening. So this public forum is a topic of police officers and the use of force in order to share vital information with the public and the university students regarding the topical issue of police and citizen contacts. As a result of the deadly incidents arising from investigatory stops across the country, criminal justice professor Danielle Tunian-Smith and her colleagues, we decided to sponsor this program as an opportunity to present information surrounding police and citizen contacts. Professor Tunian-Smith is a retired Michigan State Police trooper, and she states, with every police and citizen contact, there may be an action and reaction that students and the public really need to understand. This forum will offer a great opportunity to understand how incidents might quickly develop with dire results. We hope to share information in order to increase the understanding and appreciation of such incidents and to avoid harmful or deadly results. So this forum, it's going to, we do have a couple absent panelists this evening, which is Bert Castleberry, Leno County prosecutor, and then Pat McGreevy, retired first lieutenant from Michigan State Police. But then we have Chief Vincent Emmerich, APD. We have Lieutenant Tony Cuevas from Michigan State Police. And then we have Lieutenant Chris Simpson, Jackson Police Department. Then we have Trooper Herman Brown, Michigan State Police. Trooper Rose Ford, Michigan State Police. Detective Lieutenant Mark Moore, Michigan State Police. And then Honorable Joseph Costello, retired from the 38th Circuit Court, Monroe Judge. Again, tonight, the objective of the presentation and objective is to offer an opinion on, is not to offer an opinion on specific cases, but to rather address the issue of police and citizen contact in a more general context, with the goal of better understanding the process of police and citizen contact. However, all of you will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions, but we do have some generated questions from the Criminal Justice Department just to kind of kick things off and address police use of force. So I'll turn it over if you'd like to go down the line, introduce yourself as a panelist member, and then your perspective on use of force. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Can everybody hear me? This microphone? I'm Lieutenant Tony Cuevas. I'm the post commander over the State Police in Monroe. My post covers Monroe and Lenawee County. Been with the agency a little over 22 years. I've been a post commander for 6 of that. And you know, this is a very interesting forum. We talk a lot about use of force, and especially it's a hot topic. I know at my dinner table too, especially with my family members, always ask me, you know, certain perspective on, you know, the Michael Brown incident, you know, and other deadly force scenarios. But I really feel that you know, use of force for any police organization really starts in 4 key parts. First, it starts with your selection process. You know, you get the right people for the job. And that's really starts in the background phase. So when we go and select a candidate, we start to look at life decisions that a particular individual makes. And then you want to make sure that you get the right candidate for the job. And then from that, then you have to train them. Proper training is another key element of any of any law enforcement agency. You know, our recruits receive over 200 hours of use of force training between firearms, defensive tactics, scenario-based training, this Range 3000, which is an interactive simulator, and then that goes right and carries over into in-service training. Once the troopers get off they have the field training program and they're confirmed for solo patrol, then they fall into more of an in-service cycle, and that keeps our veteran officers from being complacent. Also keeps them sharp on new techniques. And then you look at the officer's experience. The level of experience an officer has is key. The more veteran police officer will make better decisions because he or she's already been in those particular scenarios. And also they have a better understanding of the community. You see a lot of police agencies doing more community outreach. And that's really to break down the walls between the officer in the car and the community that they serve. And when you start seeing that, I think you have a better understanding on, you know, how to de-escalate. And also, there's anybody up here will tell you we have frequent offenders that are like frequent flyers. You deal with them all the time. Sometimes you'll have, you know, a peaceful incident with them, and the next times, you know, you might be going fisticuffs. So just to have that knowledge of that, you know, is key also, and that can help either help de-escalate or get the type of resources you need to make sure that the situation is handled as peacefully as possible. And then lastly, you know, policy and supervision. That's probably one of the most key components in any use of force, because your people have to know what the scope of their authority is. And if they violate that authority, you have to have supervisors that have the administrative courage to make sure that they're held accountable for their actions. And that supervisory piece, you know, really keeps, you know, it keeps the law enforcement officers on their toes. It keeps, it allows the transparency that the community wants from us. And I think that's one of the most important pieces that seems to get lost sometimes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Vince Semrick. I'm the Chief of Police here in Adrian. I have worked in Adrian for 15 years, the last 4 as the Chief of Police, and I occupied every rank from patrolman on up. Lieutenant Cuevas just completely slayed my opening statement. The only difference I have here is the tracking and reports, word for word, almost identical. Very impressive. Great minds think alike, I guess. So I will do my best here. In addition to being the chief, I also am an adjunct professor here at Siena Heights. I teach law enforcement community relations. It's a junior level course, and a lot of our time is dedicated to use of force incidents. Those incidents that happen, you know, states and states away from us do have an effect on us here in Adrian. It affects our legitimacy, so we do spend a lot of time examining those cases. As Lieutenant Cuevas said, it's really a career-long, I don't know, it breaks down into several sections. When you talk in terms of use of force, you begin with your selection, you have training, policy, protocol. In the city of Adrian, we also have software designed to track officers' interactions, both positive and negative, to keep a running tally of what's happening, to alert you if there's any problems. You do your best to put as many controls in place as possible to help you along the way. For us in Adrian, our biggest phase in that program is the field training phase. It can last up to 6 months with an additional 6 months probationary period after that. So during that time, the officer is shadowed by his training officer. They are learning and signing off on our policies. They are testing and learning the protocols for the city, so that if they ever do come into contact with those individuals, as the lieutenant said, sometimes you have people you see frequently, and sometimes it's good days and sometimes it's bad. But you want to give that officer all the tools necessary to be successful when you do have those encounters. In addition to our tracking, I would just offer up that the negative incidents in the media are magnified such that it may appear that most of police contacts are negative when actually it's the opposite. I can tell you that in Adrian, last year, 2015, we had just over 20,000 calls for service. In terms of use of force, and I know you all have the force continuum on or in your packets tonight, whenever there's a use of force incident in the city of Adrian, we have a separate form that's completed. So of those 20,000 calls for service, we had 58 use of force incidents. So a very, very low number. That's just under 0.5% of those calls for service. Now that does encompass things like giving out directions, child custody disputes, on up to robberies and homicides. So of all those contacts, only 58 times did we have to use force, and those incidents are generally on the low end of the spectrum, but we'll get more into that tonight. My only thought is, in my 15 years that I've been a police officer, the vast majority of people are cooperative. If they've done wrong, they're remorseful, they want to work with you to solve the problem. It's very rare that you have to resort to use force. But there are those individuals that won't have it any other way. No matter how you approach them, no matter how you try to reason with them, they have that mindset that they're going to fight with you no matter what. And it's for those that we train so hard to try to resolve those situations peacefully without injury.
Good evening. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Tori, is that on?
How about now? That's better? All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Christopher Simpson of the Jackson Police Department. I've been employed at the Jackson Police Department about 24 years. We have a retirement of 25 years service, so that tells you how short I am as far as looking for retirement, police eligible. Like some of my colleagues have already stated, I'm not going to regurgitate everything they stated, but first and foremost, I'd like to thank the university for the invite. I appreciate coming here and being able to explore the topic and tell you our perspective from our experience as law enforcement officials. I also like to thank you, my colleagues next to me. It takes courage to get up here and speak and bring forth the topic. I am from Jackson, like I stated. I am not a stranger to Adrian. I used to be a National Guardsman. Actually, my unit was down the street, so I am a little familiar with Adrian. We also have a training consortium through Jackson, Calhoun County, Lenawee County, so we all train together as well. In the city of Jackson, we had about 40,000 calls for service, and that is done with 47 sworn officers. When I came into our department, we were somewhere in the area of 75 to 80 police officers, so you can see how some of the economic woes have affected our municipality. In that time, last year we made 2,000 arrests. Of those 2,000 arrests, we used of force was documented 42 times. It's about 2.2% of our total incidents that we responded to. We're very proud of that number. Like one of my colleagues stated, in every use of force incident that occurs in the city of Jackson, it is documented. All of our officers wear body mics, we have cameras in the cars, and things of that nature to make sure we track information correctly. In my 24 years, we have had 8 officer-involved shootings. Throughout my 24 years, I've experienced the experience that I don't want to experience anymore, and that is one of my officers was killed in the line of duty, and that was in 2010, Officer James Bottle. I tell you that to say this: there are 2 things that are more likely going to get a law enforcement agency sued. That is failing to train and also failing to supervise. So based on use of force incidents that we have, we train very, very rough in those areas. When I mean rough, very in-depth. We make sure our supervisors know the policy. We make sure our officers know the policy. They are tested in policy. We train to the policy. You have the use of force continuum in front of you. And we train to that. And we train more on the theory of a crawl, walk, and a run theory. We do that concerning our prosecutor with legal updates, use of force instructors. We continually train our instructors to get the latest and greatest on training endeavors based on lessons learned. What has happened, what has worked, what has not worked. And we also use real life time simulations and shoot, don't shoot scenarios. Based on all that training, it is ongoing. Laws change, different equipment comes out, tasers came out. How do we enact taser inside of our use of force policy? And that has changed throughout departments in the state several times already. So, again, thank you to the university, my colleagues here, to you guys. Sir.
Well, I'm Trooper Herman Brown, and that's my boss sitting on the end to explain all the details about our training. I've been a state trooper now for 23 years, working out of the Grove Post. I'm probably going to be the person you run into out on the road, and we're here to talk about force. We have steps that we go through, and like the lieutenant said, it's all about training. State police, we train all the time. We hear about all these incidents that happen, and we try our best not to be involved on the negative end of it. As I said before, some people you can't please. Some people want to fight, and some people want to kill an officer or anybody in their way. I've been, and those who's not familiar with the state police, I gotta believe some of the students are probably from Ohio, especially since I see the Ohio shirt staring me in the face after that Michigan loss. But state police, we do everything here. In Ohio, they have highway patrol. Highway patrol just sits on the freeway. They do all types of traffic stops on the turnpike, any part of the freeway. State police, we do everything. We're trained to stop cars. We're trained to handle domestics, breaking and entering, assaults, the barking dog complaints, the harassment. So we do everything. It all depends what post you go to. Some of the posts around the metro area will do traffic only enforcement. My post, we're fortunate we do everything. We're having complaint posts. When I say complaint, I mean about the breaking and entering, the drugs, the assaults, homicides, anything. So every trooper coming out of the academy is trained to handle it. So at our post, we come across a lot of traffic, a lot of calls, and we try to keep our head above the water. What I mean about that is when you're stopping somebody, and I'm sure being in college, you come across some people who are angry about whatever it is, and you try to have a conversation with somebody that keeps climbing up. We're trained to try to accelerate that, bring it down. Because the thing is, you don't want an angry police officer out there. And a police officer should not lose their cool when they're dealing with you. The officer knows this, and it's all about the training. And like our lieutenant said, it's all about that person. Everybody can't do this job. Everybody can't. Unfortunately, we have some people that's been exposed to doing this job improperly. But we have a lot of good officers out here, and hopefully we'll be able to answer all your questions that you have about force.
Good evening, everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming out on such a dismal night. I wish we had more people out in the crowd. Rose Ford, I have just over 22 years with the Michigan State Police. Lieutenant Cuevas and I went through the same recruit school. I had 17 and a half years on the road prior to taking my position at the training academy. I worked out of the Richmond Post over in Macomb County, worked in Macomb and St. Clair counties. Big complaint post as well as traffic. So again, we were multifaceted. We did a lot of different work there. Now that I'm at the training academy, I help train the future troopers for your state of Michigan. I teach firearms. When I'm not doing that, I'm in the ordnance unit, so I do gun repair. When we talk about the use of force continuum, the changes that I've noticed since I've been assigned to the training academy, back when Lieutenant Cuevas and I went through, and most of the troopers out there, we do a lot more scenario-based training now than what we used to do. You can never enact everything perfectly. We try and set up scenarios as far as when you have your first initial contact with a citizen. Your mouth and your brain are your biggest assets. How you treat the public and how you interact with them can escalate or de-escalate a situation. If you see their tension start rising, as previous panel members have stated, then you need to use your brain and your mouth to de-escalate the situation. don't bite into a confrontation. I'm sure everybody out in the audience has been egged into a confrontation at one point or another, whether it's verbal or physical. So we try and do a lot more scenario-based training there, where if they talk to the suspect or to whomever the scenario is based on, their actions can escalate or de-escalate that situation. We don't want everything to be a deadly force encounter because that does not set them up for success. They have to be able to use their brain and their mouth to talk to the public and to de-escalate things as much as possible. The recruits, they do reports and scenarios pretty much so since the onset of the recruit schools now. Back when we went through, we did very, very limited scenarios. Might have lasted a few days, but they do quite a few hours on that. As far as the firearms training, they have roughly 90 hours of firearms training. They start the very first week, and it goes right up until about the last 2 weeks of the recruit school. So up on the range, again, we try to change things up as much as possible. It's not always a shoot situation. We have shoot, don't shoot scenarios. We have different targets for threat assessments. So that way, when the threat does pose itself, they have to be able to identify it. They have to give verbal commands. It's not just the target faces and they shoot. So we try and mix things up as much as possible to help them out, set them up for success as well. So we're their first stepping stone prior to getting out on the road. We're going to be working with their FTOs. So what they've learned at the academy, they can take out on the road and start applying. And their field training officers can help guide them in the direction that they need to go from there.
Good evening. My name is Mark Moore. I'm a detective lieutenant with the Michigan State Police Mantis team. It's a multi-jurisdictional task force that works primarily in Monroe County. I'd like to thank the university and Judge Joe for having me here. Just listening to what my colleagues have stated, there's just a few things I'd like to add to that. First and foremost, I've been a trooper for over 17 years. I've had to draw my weapon many times. Fortunately, I've never had to fire at anybody. But I can tell you that I don't know a trooper or a deputy or any officer that I've ever worked with that goes to work wanting to harm someone. When these incidents occur across the country, especially the ones that are not favorable to police, it reflects very significantly on all of us and the jobs that we do. So we take that very seriously. And so, as everyone said, we take our training seriously. We watch what's happening around the country, and our departments, we plan and we train based on those things, so hopefully that those things don't occur. So when these things do happen, as I said, it makes our job more difficult, but there are a couple things that I would hope that you would understand. That first and foremost, what I've learned is when there is an incident, my family, like Lieutenant Cuevas says, like my family will ask me if we're having dinner or whatever the case may be. It's hard for me to judge another officer based on a split-second incident. So what I would want to relay to you is, until all the information is out there, try not to judge it yourself, because it's very difficult. I've had friends in very critical situations, and I try to put myself in that situation, and it's very hard to do. Split-second decisions based on whatever happened there obviously have huge and significant outcomes. So, with that being said, I would just ask you to be open to the situation and wait for all the information to come out before you make a decision on that. So, along with that, I look forward to answering your questions.
Good evening. My name is Joseph Costello. I'm an assistant professor of criminal justice here at Siena Heights. I'm really happy to see so many of you here. A lot of my students are here. I'm very proud to see them. I started my career in 1982 as a defense attorney. Did that for about 3 years. And then I was appointed to the bench by Governor Blanchard to the probate court. So I dealt with a lot of juvenile delinquency cases, child neglect and abuse. Got to see police officers in their jobs, handling those types of cases. I did that from 85 to 1996. And then from 1997 to 2012, I served as a circuit court judge, handling cases all the way from rape to murder to robbery. Again, got to see a lot of police officers in those situations and understood a lot of the grief that they took, especially with so many cases of resisting obstructing a police officer, and having people come in and And the number one complaint was that the officer had not read their Miranda rights to them. I try to share with my students that just because you have an encounter with a police officer does not require giving you your Miranda rights unless they're going to question you while in custody. And there's so many people out there that simply don't understand that. And sometimes that causes a situation to escalate so much worse than it might have been. And when you unravel the case and see what the charges might have been, it's usually worsened because the person misunderstands exactly just how much authority that officer has, or maybe they don't care, and they resist or obstruct that officer. It just makes the situation all that much worse. After leaving the circuit bench, I got to serve as the chief assistant prosecutor for 3 years in Monroe County, and I really enjoyed that. I do have some regrets giving that up so early, but I was able to retire, so I took it. But I got a chance to work with the officers, including Lieutenant Moore. If you look at your program tonight, and there's reference to a 41-year-old homicide case that we solved. It was not a cold case, but an old case. We knew who the person was. Lieutenant Moore was extremely instrumental as the officer in charge, trying to find all these witnesses and putting together pieces of evidence from 4 decades ago. And we were able to secure 3 convictions for second-degree murder. So something we're both very proud of. And I've had a chance to have Trooper Brown, he probably remembers this, while I was on the bench, and I had a public speaking engagement, and you might imagine that some people aren't happy with judges sometimes, and I had a security threat, and I still wanted to appear at this public appearance, and I asked if I could at least have a trooper there in case things went wrong. And Trooper Brown was there, and I appreciated that. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
And I thought I handled myself pretty well, but he said, you know, when this person of interest stood up to ask you a question, I could see that it kind of, you came unglued maybe a little bit. And I said, yeah, I think I did. But I appreciated him being there. And then Lieutenant Cuevas from the Monroe Post is such an amazing commander. He's got such a calm demeanor, and I think it shows, it resonates in the rest of the troopers that serve underneath him. A very professional man, someone we're very proud to have in Monroe County. And as Lieutenant Moore said, I think most importantly, don't know of any officer that goes to work saying he wants to harm somebody or she wants to harm somebody. No one wants to see that. And no one wants to see a bad police officer out there either. That hurts everybody. John, I'm turning it back over to you.
No, I think that's some wonderful opening remarks in regards to information on police use of force. And so far I think it is a great opening. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start with a few generated questions from our department, just to kind of get the discussion continuing, and then we'll start out with Lieutenant Cuevas to maybe address the very first question. The question is there a national or federal standard for the use of force that is by law enforcement, or is that used by the state of Michigan? And does that apply to city, county, and state law enforcement officers? And if there is any difference in between departments, what might that be?
Sure. Well, basically, that force continuum that everybody sees in front of them is developed by MPOLS, which is the entity in charge of basically training, the training consortium for the entire state of Michigan. It encompasses state, federal, state, local, and municipal officers. And the use of force is basically defined under that. That force continuum shows basically the subject's actions and the officer's response. It's on a sliding scale. And then another, I guess, key component is too, you know, the reasonableness of the use of force is defined by case law. And I'm sure Judge Costello will say more about that. But basically, there was a court decision in Graham versus Connor that kind of put the whole perspective on police use of force, and it's judged under the light of basically what the officer had right in front of him at that particular time. So depending on all the circumstances that the officer was facing, that's how the courts determine the reasonableness of the force used by the officer.
Yeah, we use the same continuum. It's trained in all the police academies, and it's incorporated into our city use of force policy. This actual continuum is in there when we train and study with it, so we operate under the same
protocols that the state does in that respect.
Any others would like to add to this? Trooper Fuller, do you address this during training and discuss the force continuum at the initial recruit?
Yes. As far as the force continuum goes, whether it's firearms, defensive tactics, patrols, the force continuum covers the whole spectrum there. And again, when you look at your subject's actions, so if you have someone that is in active resistance, our first presence right there, we can go up one level from that. So usually we take the subject's actions, we'll be at that level, and then we can go up one level from there. So depending on whatever the scenario-based training is, the force continuum applies throughout all the different training as far as the academy goes, defensive tactics, firearms, patrol scenarios. And again, they get tested on this not only at the academy, but also once they get out to their work sites as probationary troopers. Every year we have to get tested as far as our defensive tactics, force continuum. We have a use of force test that we have to take annually along with our firearms qualification in the summertime. So they are expected to know all this. So it starts right at the recruit school, and that's their building foundation right there. That's where it all starts. And then once it goes out to their work sites, then it's continued on from there.
And I think that's a great lead into the question number 2. You started to answer that. How often do police officers receive training for use of force standards? And how are police officers evaluated or tested for competency on this topic?
Our officers are tested once a year annually. They are trained twice a year, though. What I mean by trained, they actually go through our pressure points and control tactics based on the use of force continuum, putting them through scenarios. Again, our organization goes more or less through a crawl, a walk, and a run phase. So they may have some classroom portion, they may have some discussion and some feedback, and by the end of the training, they are going pretty much 80%, sharpening their craft, I guess, and more or less towards control tactics. They're evaluated by the use of force instructors. Our use of force instructors have to be recertified every 3 years. They go through a rigorous training to make sure they understand the control tactics that they have to instruct our officers. We also do a test just like the state police. They do that once a year as well. And in that test, you are tested against your knowledge of the force continuum, our control tactics, which is all stated within our policy.
I'll just add to that, as far as the use of force, you have to remember, it's not only the use of force by the officer using their gun, but it's also hand applied. That's why we use, you heard Troop mention defensive tactics. Defensive tactics like a hands-on, because when we're dealing with people, you don't pull your gun on every situation. Some situations just like in your continuing force form here, it can be passive resistant. We have people protesting different events, and when the police come out there and have to remove you, they don't pull their gun to do that. Usually they latch on to you, grab you by the hand, or we have the pressure points, because our goal is not to hurt you, but just get you to comply with what we're trying to do.
Hey, John, I was just going to follow up on something Lieutenant Cuevas had said. He was correct when he said if it's going to get reviewed in court, now we're talking about a lawsuit where an officer's being sued, and because of the fact that it's going to be a claim of a violation of someone's constitutional rights, it's going to end up in the federal courts, which, depending on where you live in the state of Michigan, is going to be either on the east side in Detroit or the west in Grand Rapids, or any of those federal courts along there. And the jury will be instructed that they have to look at it at the time the officer was experiencing the situation, and not in a hindsight 2020. What if you did this? What happens if you had done this? It's at the time that the officer was doing it, and you have to take it from the standard of what would a reasonable police officer have done in those circumstances. So they're going to bring in experts to say this is how officers are trained, or this is how officers should have perceived the situation, this should have been the reaction. So you're going to get that type of activity in federal court. And if it's a use of deadly force that's been used, and there's a lawsuit over that, then the claim's going to have to be that the suspect must have threatened the officer with a weapon, or there must be probable cause to believe that the subject had committed a crime that inflicted or threatened to inflict serious physical harm. And if the officer has a chance, some physical or some type of warning, if practical, must be given that the officer is going to use deadly force. So you could imagine it's a very chaotic situation, very difficult thing for juries to consider, because when they hear or something's been videotaped and they see it, you've seen it, posted on Facebook and other social media websites. I'm sure if you haven't been used to seeing those types of things, it looks rather horrible, and it is. But that doesn't mean that every time that there's an officer involved in that it's going to result against the officer. It really comes down to the development of the facts, the ability of the attorneys to present the case to the jury, and that's assuming it even gets there. People need to understand that if you can't show to the court that the case is sufficient enough to stand on its own to raise a question of fact, many of these cases are summarily dismissed because it doesn't meet the right standard.
Perfect. And so this really goes on to the following question. It has been established that all police departments have a set standard and policy, especially for the state of Michigan. So we do know that that does exist. How is this actually translated and confirmed that each officer is fully trained and up to date on the policy? How is that disseminated to the department and each officer?
I brought a copy of our state police use of force policy. It's relatively thick, and it really kind of defines pretty much every single thing that the subject control continuum goes down. But it starts really from day one with us. I mean, Trooper Ford talked about it at the recruit school. I mean, they break it down, and then that's just basically reiterated throughout the officer's career. You know, and when the officers do, we also have the same reporting program like the city of Adrian. We call it Blue Team, but it's an early warning system where an officer has to complete their written report and then go back and do a Blue Team as well. And then that's, in that Blue Team, the threshold for them to complete that is at the act of resistance. So if you look at your force continuum, they have to do a Blue Team when it hits basically right in the center. So an act of resistance is the push of someone. If I go to handcuff somebody and they push my hands away, that's active resistance. So I'm doing a Blue Team based on that. So you'd be surprised how many Blue Teams you do, which back in the day when most of us started, we never did anything in regards to that. It was just documented in your report and you just carried on with it. Now, you know, it's reviewed by several layers of supervision. And when we're reviewing it as a supervisor, we bring out the policy and we look at it and see if our officers or our troopers did violate it. So, and if there's ever an issue of that, or if it's something that's questionable, I always order the trooper to go back and review it and tell me, you know, if their actions were within policy. And that kind of just rehashes it because it's good for them to look at it. And again, annually we get tested on it.
If I could mash together questions 2 and 3. In regards to our training, we do our annual recertification, and we are also somewhat opportunistic when it comes to other trainings. For example, if we have a 4-hour block in ethics and we want to make it a duty day, we'll add 4 hours of defensive tactics. So officers may be doing scenario-based training several times throughout the year. We're fortunate enough that we have a video simulator in our building that we're able to access whenever we like, so we have the ability to pair those things together and get a lot more training time in than just scheduling it once a year. As far as how is it confirmed that each police officer is up to date on the policy, we incorporate that into the training phase. There will be a classroom portion, there's a written exam. Part of the classroom portion is review of the policy, Each officer signs off on it as a training task when it comes out, and then it is reviewed annually with that recertification as well.
Lieutenant Chris Simpson, is that rather universal with Jackson Police Department?
Pretty close to. All our records are kept electronically. From day one, you're sworn in, there's your training file. Any and all training that you go through is documented and in your training file. So every year that you take our use of force test, that you do the use of force agility, is documented. Pass, retraining, failed, whatever it may be, it is documented. So we have those for the officer's career. And even if they go to a different organization, we still maintain those records.
So it certainly sounds that training and supervision is imperative to continue, and I think that's some of the major concern that we had as instructors too, is that we're passing along the information to our students and the public that we emphasize training, and then make sure that we have detailed supervision. So no, I think that's perfectly addressed. As we go through into the fourth question, and we can apply the force continuum with the audience, and we'll start to turn this over to the audience to be able to ask some generated questions as well. Does each police department require any special report to be filed when there has been a use of force? And when this is, that's what it sounds like is the standard, what would be the lowest level use of force that would trigger such a report?
For us, like I said earlier, it's the active resistance. That's the level that that blue team or that specialized use of force. And blue team captures not only the use of force, but also pursuits, use of a firearm, complaint against employee, all of that stuff that we use on the human resources side to see if there's a particular problem with this individual. It doesn't mean that if someone has 10 use of force incidents that are all justified, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad police officer, but it's something where I may get a call from human resources and our professional standards section, and we'll say, hey, just heads up, LT, you have a trooper at your post that's had 10 use of force incidents. And because I review all of them, I can pull them out of the drawer and say, yep, they all look good to me. I mean, everything looks good. It's all within policy. We also have video, like a lot of the other agencies have. We don't have body cameras, but we have in-car cameras that record audio of the incidents when they're outside of the camera view. So that's our policy on it.
We're very similar. We have a separate use of force report in addition to our general narrative form. If you're looking at the continuum, our use of force reports would start basically if you lay hands on the subject. So if you're looking at the officer response at the bottom, where it says officer presence and verbal direction, if that's not enough, you take a step beyond that. If you ask the person to step over into another room and they won't, so if I place my hand on their back or their elbow, sir, please move over, that is what would key in our use of force report, which would then be attached to the initial narrative that would already be completed. The lieutenant hit on one very important point, just to reiterate that in our software, a high use of force count does not denote a bad officer. For example, we have 3 8-hour shifts in Adrian. If you work afternoon shifts, you're going to have a lot more encounters, a lot more citizen encounters than you would during the day shift, the earlier part of the day. So if you have a new officer, everything is based on seniority, so that person is going to be going to more calls on a busier shift, and they're going to have a higher count, which just follows. So like the lieutenant said, you go through case by case and make sure that there's not an issue if that does come up. We do have controls in place like body cams. We have things like that we can review. So if there is an issue, we will know about it.
Ours is very similar. It is, at our level, it's actually when you go to physical controls. Anytime an officer has to physically control someone, use of force report is completed, along with their general incident report. Now, that use of force form, well, actually, when that officer commits some type of force on a person to arrest them, they must notify their supervisor immediately. There's always a supervisor on duty, if not 1 or 2, that is working out in the field. That supervisor verbally goes over that incident to make sure everything that officer did is in compliance with our policy. Once that use of force form is completed by the officer, it's turned into a supervisor. That supervisor reviews it, signs off on it, all the particulars in that report, then comes to my desk. I look at the report itself, and I look at every video or audio involved with the officer during the time of the use of force incident. I tag that video, and that video is stored in our video system. I then turn everything over to our deputy chief for a final look, and then it's stored upstairs in our records bureau when that officer's file. So it is very complex as far as the reporting goes, and those are kept on file and they are separated from our general reports.
With our blue team incidents, especially if there's use of a firearm involved, once it goes through the proper channels and the post commander, such as Lieutenant Cuevas, would review it and it goes through HR, eventually my supervisor, Sergeant Theron, would get a copy of that use of force with the firearm. He would review it. We make sure that everything is correct as far as them being able to draw and display their weapon or even use their weapon at that time. We also keep lesson plans for everything that the recruits do. So that way, especially if we have a probationary trooper that's out on the road, they might come back saying, well, we weren't taught that, or we weren't taught this way or that way. We can go back to our lesson plan and say, no, this is what was instructed. You were taught the proper way. So we try and cover all our bases on that. But again, it all starts, with the training that they receive at the academy and continue on out the field.
I just wanted to kind of touch on also something, as we talked about, the high incidence of use of force does not ultimately indicate a bad police officer and so forth. I guess a further question, though, to go beyond that is there a set standard or a minimum number of use of force for each individual officer before maybe they might have a citation or have to go for retraining?
Basically for us, there's a threshold out there where there's so many use of force and then I get contacted. But if you see an individual, it's kind of done on a case-by-case basis, and I think that if you ever had one that you came across where you thought there was a violation of policy or even potentially a criminal violation,